How many times had I endured such cutting remarks? It seemed as though my worth was constantly questioned, my abilities scorned. I had entered into marriage with sincere affection, believing in the promise of happiness together. But as time wore on, that love faded into the ether. Instead, my husband's authoritative demeanor grew more pronounced with each passing day, burdening me even with the care of his own mother. I found myself teetering on the precipice of both physical and emotional exhaustion. If this trajectory persisted, I feared for my sanity. Yet in my darkest moment, an unexpected beacon of support emerged. My own mother-in-law, the very person whose care had become an additional weight on my shoulders. I'm happy to rewrite it for you. My name's Mary Wagner, and I'm 30 years old. After finishing university, I landed a job at a publishing company. However, I bid farewell to my career upon tying the knot, embracing the role of a full-time housewife. Friends often express their envy, assuming I must lead a charmed life. How fortunate you are to be a homemaker. Your husband must be quite successful, they remark. But the truth is, my married life lacks the joy they envision. In fact, it feels more akin to a descent into the depths of despair. The root cause of my unhappiness. My husband, Jack. Our paths crossed in the workplace, and after 2 years of courtship, we exchanged vows. Jack, 3 years my senior, possessed a reserved demeanor, and we weren't exactly the epitome of affectionate partners. Nonetheless, I was drawn to his steadfast sense of self and mature demeanor. I envisioned a tranquil, content life together. That was my hope, at least. Once we exchanged vows, Jack's demeanor underwent a stark transformation. Frankly put, he adopted a patriarchal stance. I came to this realization mere days into our marriage. At Jack's behest, I embraced the role of a full-time homemaker, throwing myself into domestic duties from the onset of our union. On that particular evening, I diligently prepared dinner, eagerly awaiting Jack's return. He arrived home a tad after 7 p.m. Upon surveying the meal laid out before him, his voice erupted with dissatisfaction. "What's this?" he barked. "It's a casserole with salad and a side of soup," I responded hesitantly. "Don't toy with me. If you're catering to your weary husband, it ought to be a lavish spread. Your past successes are no excuse. How can you falter at such basic tasks? You're utterly incompetent as a woman, utterly." "You could have said that differently," I murmur, my troubled expression met with Jack's glare. Suddenly, he hurls the dish of salad to the floor. A startled scream escapes my lips. "What? It's because you, as my wife, can't even manage the basics, isn't it?" Jack interjects sharply. "I made my expectations clear. There's no need to disrespect the food like that." "Shut up. Instead of making excuses, use that deficient brain of yours to consider how to better fulfill your role as my wife, you fool." It's the first time I've been called that. Sure, I've faced reprimands from my parents, arguments with my brother and friends, but never have I been subjected to such cruelty, especially from the man I love. It's only been a few days since our wedding. I never imagined he would react so harshly over a dinner choice. Nevertheless, as a housewife, I remain financially reliant on him. I can't risk defying my husband. As a newlywed, my utmost desire is to avoid upsetting him. Since that incident, I've been tiptoeing around him, careful not to trigger his anger. I meticulously ironed every piece of laundry, prepared the simplest of meals like loaded potato soup, and seasoned side dishes to perfection. Not a single hair must be left on the floor. Under this constant pressure, my nerves fray. Yet his patriarchal control only tightens. "There's a crease in this shirt sleeve. Can't you see?" he berates. "I am sorry. I'll iron it right away," I stammer. "I'm already running late for work." "You're always so slow," he complains. "I'll hurry," I assure him. "You won't have time. You're insufferable in the morning." "How much more do you want to upset me, you incompetent woman?" he snaps. "I'm sorry. Truly deeply sorry." I apologize, my voice trembling. Whenever I erred, I instinctively lowered my head in apology, a practice enforced by my husband. Depending on the gravity of my mistake, the depth of my contrition varied. Sometimes a mere bow would suffice for forgiveness, but for more serious transgressions, kneeling was required. And in moments of repeated mistakes, he would ominously present me with a completed divorce document. It's astonishing how quickly one can become accustomed to such treatment. After a year of enduring this cycle, I began to internalize a sense of utter worthlessness. Yet I couldn't bear the thought of divorce, especially in my current state of unemployment. I couldn't shatter my parents' joy over our marriage by admitting to such a failure. especially not after such a short time. The prospect of enduring perpetual reprimand from my husband filled me with despair for the future. As usual, I was in the midst of preparing dinner, anticipating his return. My daily ritual involved completing the meal by 7 p.m., ensuring it was ready for him to enjoy whenever he arrived. The moment the front door creaked open, I began setting the table. If I failed to finish before he sat down, it would inevitably lead to another round of apologies. Typically, my husband would take his seat in silence, but on this particular day, something felt different. As he loosened his tie, he initiated a conversation. "Mary, we're moving to my parents' house this weekend." I paused, puzzled. "Your parents' house? You mean your mother's place?" He nodded. "Yes, that's correct." "Have everything packed by then?" I couldn't help but inquire, "Why the sudden change, Jack? You've always been adamant about not returning to your parents' house." His icy stare silenced my probing, and after a momentary pause, he spoke. "My mother had a fall, and living independently has become too challenging for her." My concern surged. "We should go to her immediately. She's been in the hospital for a week. We'll move once she's discharged this weekend," he explained. "I understand now," I replied quietly. "But why the sudden change? You've always resisted returning to your parents' home. Can you guess why?" he remarked with a chilling edge. "I can't deny the allure of potential inheritance," he confessed, his tone betraying a hint of satisfaction. "You see, my father was an ordinary man, but my mother's family is wealthy. She has a substantial amount of money." "What does that have to do with her current situation?" I questioned. His lips curled into a calculating smile. "If I play the devoted son during this ordeal, perhaps I'll be in line for a significant inheritance. If we, as a couple, rush to her side, I'm confident she'll be inclined to bestow the entire inheritance upon us." "Isn't that a bit disrespectful?" I dared to question. "Shut up. You're being supported by me, so just listen quietly," he retorted sharply. "I am sorry," I stammered, cowed by his outburst. The air was thick with tension as his words echoed in the room, leaving me feeling small and powerless. Instinctively, I offered my usual apology. With a triumphant air, he declared, "Listen, from now on, you'll be taking care of my mother. You'll work as a maid in my parents' house for the rest of your life." I faltered at his words. Is that what you mean?" I ventured to ask, but he cut me off sharply. "Don't argue. Who do you think is providing for your current lifestyle? It's all thanks to me, isn't it? Depending on how well you care for my mother, our inheritance could be affected. So don't neglect your duties. Understand?" Pressured to respond, I murmured softly, "Yes." His satisfaction evident, he flashed a smug smile before beginning his meal. Forcing me into the role of caregiver solely for the sake of his mother's inheritance, my husband doesn't regard me as his wife. To him, I'm merely a housemaid. Though I was aware of this truth, hearing it explicitly was a jolt to my senses. Yet I lacked the courage to challenge him. In a way, I felt as though I had been brainwashed, my own aspirations erased. The following day, following my husband's orders, I started packing our belongings. A week later, as directed by him, we relocated to my mother-in-law's residence, coinciding with her discharge from the hospital. On the day of her discharge, Jack didn't show up at the hospital, citing work obligations. Consequently, I was the one accompanying my mother-in-law home. During our journey back, she offered an apology. "Mary, I'm truly sorry. It's because of me that you're going through all of this. Don't worry about it. As a housewife, if I can lend you support while being at home, then nothing could be more important," I reassured her. "Thank you. But are you not bothered by how sudden this all is?" she inquired. "Well, the packing was a bit rushed, I suppose," I admitted. "I can imagine. Even I was taken aback by Jack's decision to move in with us. I wonder what prompted him to do this so abruptly." "Mary, have you heard anything?" she pressed. "No, I haven't heard anything," I replied softly. It wasn't surprising that my mother-in-law found the situation peculiar. Jack had always harbored a dislike for her, often expressing his grievances with remarks like, "She's a nuisance and I'd rather not be around her." Yet he swiftly moved in with her upon her hospitalization, driven by the prospect of her inheritance. To be honest, I was startled by Jack's sudden change in behavior. However, I couldn't bring myself to disclose the truth to my mother-in-law. Striving to maintain composure, I concealed my inner turmoil. Thus began my life as a caregiver, navigating the unfamiliar responsibilities alongside the household chores in the spacious family home. Even amidst our return to his parents' residence, Jack's domineering demeanor remained unchanged, subjecting me to verbal abuse almost daily. In my mother-in-law's absence, there was no respite from the demands of housekeeping and caregiving, and my days were consumed with ceaseless activity from dawn till dusk. This routine persisted for about a month until one day, while I was attending to my mother-in-law's needs, she expressed her concern. "Mary, have you lost weight again?" No, please don't worry about it, Mother," I reassured her. "Are you certain? I noticed the same thing when you first moved in. You seemed much more fatigued compared to when you were newlywed," she remarked. She was correct. Over the course of our year and a half of marriage, I had shed 15 pounds. It wasn't due to skipping meals, but rather a diminished appetite and a lack of leisurely dining time. My mother-in-law discerned the changes in me, ones that even Jack hadn't noticed. Simply that acknowledgement eased some of my loneliness. Wanting to alleviate her concerns, I mustered a smile. "Don't fret over me, Mother. Just sharing these conversations with you each day brings me joy. Mary, let's steer away from this gloomy talk. Shall I attend to your other hand, Mother?" I suggested, attempting to lighten the mood. "Oh yes, please," she responded. Just as I began to assist her, my phone abruptly rang. "It seems to be Jack," my mother-in-law observed, causing my body to stiffen. Jack insisted I answer his calls promptly. However, with a wet towel in hand, I couldn't respond immediately. Yet I knew any delay would provoke his anger. Utilizing my elbow, I managed to tap the answer button and switched the call to speaker. "Hello," I greeted hesitantly. Instantly, a barrage of angry shouts erupted from the other end of the line. "Hey, don't play games. Why did you answer immediately?" Jack demanded furiously. I'm sorry. I was a bit preoccupied," I stammered, bracing myself for his wrath. "What? A maid should answer on the first ring. But I was occupied and couldn't," I explained. "Didn't I always tell you not to talk back? You're so frustrating. Why are you so incapable?" Jack's voice seethed with anger. I'm sorry," I apologized meekly. "Are you ensuring the old lady is properly cared for? The inheritance hinges on your performance. Do you understand?" he pressed. Being humiliated in front of my mother-in-law filled me with shame. Jack continued to hurl insults, branding me incompetent and bothersome before abruptly ending the call. Following Jack's tirade, a weighty silence engulfed the room. It was my mother-in-law who broke it. "Mary, was that Jack? Does he always speak to you like that?" Yes, but it's my fault. I am incompetent," I admitted quietly. "What nonsense is that? You're such a kind and wonderful girl, Mary," she reassured me with sincerity. "Mom, I can't ignore this, Mary. It's time to take a stand." My mother-in-law then proposed a plan. Following her lead, I gathered all of Jack's belongings and deposited them in the yard before locking the front door. Together, we awaited Jack's return. Several hours passed before we heard noises from the entrance. It was likely Jack, but the locked door remained impassable. Ignoring the intercom's persistent chimes, I followed my mother-in-law's instructions. Eventually, my phone began to ring. It was Jack. Switching the call to speaker, I answered, "Hello." He began shouting immediately, "Hey, stop playing games. Open the front door this instant." "I can't do that." "What? What do you mean?" "This is your mother's directive." Unable to grasp the situation, he continued to shout, "Stop messing around and open it now." In response, my mother-in-law's voice rang out, cold and resolute. "The one who's messing around here is you fool." "Mom, I always knew you were distant, but I never imagined you would treat your wife like this." "No, that's not. I sensed something was amiss when you suddenly moved in to exploit your wife and rely on inheritance. How could you lead such a disgraceful existence?" my mother-in-law admonished. "No, that's not true," Jack protested. "What's not true? I have no intention of leaving you any inheritance. If you understand, get lost. This is my house. You will never be allowed back in." Flustered by my mother-in-law's accusations, Jack began pounding on the door. Through the phone, I could hear him pleading, "Please do something. I have an ally in my mother-in-law. I won't be manipulated any longer," I declared with resolve. Addressing Jack firmly over the phone, I stated, "I want a divorce. I can't continue with you any longer." "What? What are you saying?" he exclaimed in disbelief. "Enough. I refuse to remain married to a man like you any longer. I refuse to squander my life. I refuse to sacrifice my own happiness for yours, I declared resolutely. Dee, don't be ridiculous. You can't live without me, Jack protested. There's nothing I can't handle. No matter how difficult it may be, it's preferable to being with you. I will conquer any obstacle. I no longer require your presence in my life. I refuse to tolerate garbage like you, I retorted firmly. With that, I abruptly ended the call and blocked his number. His shouts could be heard from outside, eventually turning into cries of despair. My mother-in-law reported his disturbance to the authorities. Due to his disruptive behavior, he was escorted away by the police. Using the divorce papers he had previously provided, I initiated formal proceedings to end our marriage. Additionally, I pursued legal action against him for the mental and physical anguish he had caused me. With my mother-in-law's support as a witness, the legal proceedings progressed smoothly. After compensating me with a lump sum, Jack's savings were depleted. Furthermore, his employment was terminated by his company upon discovering his police record, relegating him to a lower position. Naturally, my mother-in-law declined to leave her inheritance to Jack. After consulting with a lawyer and honoring my mother-in-law's wish to entrust everything to me, it was agreed that she would transfer approximately $1 million to me annually. I continue to provide care for my mother-in-law in her home. It's the least I can do for her now. Mary, I'm deeply sorry for always burdening you. Even after divorcing Jack, you're still here caring for me. Why do you say that, Mom? I should be the one thanking you. Truly, I feel blessed to have a daughter like you. The feeling is mutual. Let's continue to support each other, all right? My life alongside my mother-in-law is now filled with more joy than I could have imagined. I'll strive to do everything within my power for her until the end of her days.
You overheard our conversation yesterday, didn't you? My eldest son and his wife are returning home for the birth of their child. So, I need you to clear your stuff up to the yard. Excuse me, but you can't have kids anyway. You'll even help with my son's work. The least you could do is make some room. I'm paying $10,000 in rent, and this is getting too tiresome to deal with. I've been living with my mother-in-law, but now she wants me out of the house because my brother-in-law and his wife are returning. Between my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, his wife, and my husband, this house is full of problems. I've been trying to keep things running smoothly, but it's becoming a hassle to think about it all. I'm done thinking. Okay, I'll leave, but I can't just put my belongings in the yard. So I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you, that's a big help. Ignoring my pleas, my mother-in-law, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called the junk removal service. Once I stopped thinking, no one could stop my actions. I'm Linda, a 40-year-old IT consultant. My husband, Mark, is also 40 and runs 3 restaurants as a sole proprietor. We're both 40 and people often assume we've been married a long time and have a kid or two, but we're actually newlyweds. We both live as workaholics and didn't marry until this age. I had given up on marriage just before turning 40, but a random visit to a bar after work changed my mind. This your first time here? Mark asked. Yes, that's right. I replied. Feeling comfortable in Mark's restaurant, I started visiting frequently as a regular. I always sat at the end of the bar, and it became normal for Mark to chat with me while I ate. What does an IT consultant do? Mark asked. Introducing it to companies, strategic planning. I've worked with restaurants too. Once I suggested a tablet-based ordering system to reduce labor costs and improve efficiency, I replied. Slowly, I was drawn to his dedication to his work, and likewise, Mark grew fond of me, seeing that I was a hardworking person. I'm always busy with work and can't talk much. How about we go out for dinner sometime? Mark suggested. Excited about the chance to dine with a restaurateur, I eagerly agreed. We started dating, and 2 years later, as we both turned 40, we decided to get married. Feeling shy about being a bride at 40, I asked my husband to skip the wedding ceremony and we just took some photos of us dressed up. After we got married, I moved from my apartment to my husband's house, a 3-story building with a garden and parking located in a high-end area. The rent is apparently around $10,000. Some might think it's unthinkable to live with a mother-in-law right after getting married, but I'm 40, so I don't mind much. Plus, my mother-in-law is 70 and my father-in-law has passed away, so living together seemed necessary when my husband suggested it. I immediately agreed, but after moving in with my mother-in-law, I regretted accepting so quickly. When I moved into my husband's house besides the bedroom for us, I even got a lavish office room for myself. His house seemed too big for just 2 people, with many spare rooms. Once I settled in, I asked my husband a simple question. Why do we need such a big house just for you and your mother? I have a brother 3 years older than me. He left home after college, and I've lost touch with him for the most part. He hasn't been home at all, and it's been a few years since I've heard from him. He's such a man that one day he might get into trouble and come back to me and Mom, right? So we decided to rent a bigger house, my husband explained. I think it's a little too big, I said. Well, I got married, and you came, so I guess it all worked out, my husband said with a smile as he unboxed my books and arranged them on the shelf. He talked about his brother Daniel from his story. It seems Daniel is aimlessly hopping from job to job, but my husband doesn't think badly of him. Don't talk about that kid. What if he really comes back? My mother-in-law appeared at the doorway of what would be my office, seemingly checking on us. It appears she doesn't have a good opinion of him, unlike my husband. It's understandable for a mother to show a cold reaction to an eldest son who shirks his responsibilities. However, I'm worried that my husband and my mother-in-law might clash over his brother someday. Also, I'm not too fond of you either, Mom. Come on, we're going to live together now, so stop saying things like that, I said. I'm not saying you should leave. I just need to make things clear from the start. My mother-in-law walked away, her slippers making a padding sound. I'm sorry, I'll talk to her, my husband said. It's okay. I got a similar talk when we met for the wedding. I'll build a relationship with your mother as we live together, I replied. I took a book from my husband's paused hands and placed it on the shelf. It seems she doesn't like my age. I'm 40, so it's not impossible to have children, but I guess it's a challenging thought. Also, Mark's elder brother Daniel is not married and has no children, so there's a high chance that my mother-in-law won't get to see her grandchildren. That's why she's disappointed and wishes Mark had married someone younger. To her, Daniel, who doesn't fulfill his role as the eldest son, and I, who can't fulfill my role as a wife in her eyes, are probably the same. I understand her feelings, but I can't turn back the clock on my body, so there's nothing I can do about that one. Once the move was completely finished, and our married life officially began, my mother-in-law's coldness towards me became evident. She ignored or avoided me when I spoke and tried to have as little to do with me as possible. It's a bit lonely, but since there's no harassment or physical violence, I guess I should consider it okay for now. I can build a relationship with her over time, but more pressing is my concern for Mark. Are you okay with your work? I asked him. No, it's pretty bad. I need to take action soon, but it's tough to arrange the finances, Mark replied, sitting at the dining table with his head in his hands. I stopped doing the dishes and sat down in front of him to listen. These are tough times. Prices are soaring, expenses climbing, and customers are tightening their wallets. There's no end in sight if this keeps up. We might have to close another one of our stores, Mark continued, about a year into our marriage. The situation at Mark's restaurants worsened. One of the 3 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might have to shut down too. Seeing Mark's troubled face made me feel distressed, but my mother-in-law seemed unaffected by these troubles. You're Mark's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just do your own job. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife? My mother-in-law's voice pierced through the air from the living room as she overheard our conversation. I wondered what she was thinking, but she has her own way of seeing things. Mark has been running his own restaurant for nearly 10 years, overcoming various challenges. I believe he'll pull through this time too. You, his wife, shouldn't be making that face. Are you trying to feed into his anxiety and make him fail? What a terrible wife, she shouted again, her words filled with spite and venom. I knew she wasn't just trying to fire me up, but she wasn't entirely wrong. I took her words positively and decided to support Mark to the fullest, smiling reassuringly at my anxious husband. A year later, just as she said, Mark managed to turn this situation around and avoided closing a second store. See, I told you, I said to my mother-in-law. A stupid wife who can't even trust her husband. Don't drag Mark down, she replied, lashing out at me without reservation. The relationship with her might seem to have worsened, but since Mark's business is doing well, I'll consider it a break-even situation. I thought things were balancing out, but it turned out to be a clear negative for me. Mark. Daniel called for my brother, my mother-in-law suddenly said. Yes, Daniel's girlfriend is pregnant. That's great news. She's a 32-year-old who worked at the same bar as Mark. They asked, something. Why are you being so formal all of a sudden? I asked. Daniel is a freelancer and so is his pregnant girlfriend. With a baby on the way, they're struggling. They asked if they could move into this house and if they could work at your restaurant, my mother-in-law explained. I was contemplating how to confront Mark about the affair from the dining room when my mother-in-law came into the living room and started talking to him. The conversation was about Daniel, whom I've never met, and I was completely left out as they continued talking. It was a strange scene. She used to dislike Daniel for not fulfilling his role as the eldest son, yet now she was asking Mark to welcome him. The reason was simple, the grandchild. She had given up hope of seeing a grandchild, but now saw an opportunity and completely changed her stance. She was even planning to offer them a home and jobs. Ah, okay. Mark finally replied, looking back at me with a clearly troubled expression. Come on, it's a good thing. Daniel is in trouble and you, Mark, have the means to help him, my mother-in-law said. I felt a sense of unease. Is it not odd to have Daniel and his family move in? I looked at Mark in the living room from the dining area, and he seemed to share my concern. But with my mother-in-law's sudden decision, it seemed we were both in for some unexpected changes. I grappled with Mark's inability to say no to his mother. I had hoped he would stand up to her, but it seems it was just wishful thinking. He kept glancing at me, probably worried about my reaction. The worsening relationship with my mother-in-law, Mark's affair, now living with Daniel and his family, the problems just kept piling up. Overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I decided to abandon thinking for today and just go to sleep. The next day being a holiday and probably due to extreme mental fatigue, I slept in until late morning. Mark was at work, so it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Dreading what she might say about my sleeping in, I reluctantly headed to the living room. You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure, she said, surpassing my expectations. You heard Mark and me talking yesterday, right? Daniel and his wife are coming back for a maternity leave visit, so move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me, I was still groggy from sleep. Did she really mean I should live in the yard? Or was she telling me to leave the house? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with Mark's work, so you should at least make room for Daniel and his family. We have 2 spare rooms left, so if you leave and your office is free, we can have a bedroom and a nursery for Daniel's family and a storage room for their stuff. Don't you think the room count and usage are just perfect? It seems she was indeed telling me to leave, but a storage room for Daniel's family. I'm being kicked out to make room for a space that doesn't seem necessary. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms, and I don't mind if it's gone. A bedroom for Mark and me is enough. Daniel's family can live here without me leaving. Realizing that my mother-in-law now sees no reason for me to be in this house as a wife since she can see her grandchild and I'm paying $10,000 in rent, I'm too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and give my brain a rest. Silent with my mother-in-law, the only sound in the living room was the ticking of the clock. Okay, time to leave, I said, having rested my mind. I decided it's too much trouble to worry about what happens to Mark, my mother-in-law, Daniel's family, and their future. Understood. I'll leave. I can't put all my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up, I declared. You're leaving? Thank you, that helps, my pleased mother-in-law said, ignoring my words. I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision, made after stopping my overthinking, couldn't be stopped by anyone. Let them all regret this choice later. Having left the house, I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. I had called the junk removal service, but they needed some time to prepare. This worked out since I wanted some time too. 2 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and started living alone. I haven't heard from Mark since then. He probably thinks I'll come back eventually. The thought of Mark taking the current situation lightly infuriates me. However, today is the day after his restaurant's day off. I expect a call from Mark when he visits the restaurant for a lunch prep. Hey, what's going on here? The restaurant is completely empty, Mark exclaimed over the phone. Just as I thought, I chuckled. Mark, I could explain over the phone, but it would be more efficient if your mom was there too. I'm heading to the house now. Can you come back? You could open the restaurant anyway, right? I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by Mark's reaction. What on earth is this? The restaurant's fridge, cooking equipment, tables, all the important stuff is gone. Did you do this? Do you think you can get away with this for free? As soon as I arrived at the house, my mother-in-law started yelling at me. It seems Mark had explained half of the situation. There was an unfamiliar couple in the living room, apparently Daniel and his wife. They looked confused and anxious, not fully grasping the situation and my mother-in-law's extreme anger. It's my restaurant, so there shouldn't be a problem with me starting the closing process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, right? I countered, huh? Your restaurant? What are you talking about? Why don't you explain, Mark? You haven't told your mom, have you? You remember that I still have the main restaurant and the second branch, and the second one was in a financial crisis, right? Mark began, yes, of course. You worked hard to turn it around, changing the tables, chairs, signboard, the restaurant's atmosphere, bringing in new cooking equipment, expanding the menu, and replacing the fridge and freezer to accommodate the new menu, right? My mother-in-law nodded. Well, about that. Linda actually paid for those expenses, Mark confessed. Hearing Mark's words, my mother-in-law looked perplexed. She seemed to be trying hard to understand but probably lacked the full information to grasp everything. Mark continued, looking uncomfortable, as if he was holding back a bathroom break. Seeing that this was going nowhere, I decided to explain. Before turning 40, I was single and working in night consulting. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, nor did we buy a new house after getting married, so I had saved up quite a bit of money. I lent Mark $200,000 to help turn around his struggling second restaurant branch. $200,000? But you can't just hand over such a large amount of money to your spouse, right? My mother-in-law exclaimed. That's why I decided to buy the rights to the second branch and become its owner, I explained. I left most of the management to Mark, so there wasn't much for me to do as the owner. The only change was that Mark shifted his focus from the main branch to the second one for its recovery. When Mark's restaurant was in crisis, I had to show my concern alongside him. It was when my mother-in-law yelled at me for not showing enough trust in my husband that I decided to support Mark to the fullest. My form of support was giving him the money I had saved during my single years. Mark, is this true? My mother-in-law asked. Yeah, it's true. She said it was okay if I failed and wasted the $200,000. She gave me the money, but since it was such a large amount, it was going to fail anyway. She suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $200,000 from the restaurant's earnings. But it was simpler for Linda to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not. It's a lie. Can something like that really happen? My mother-in-law exclaimed. I understand it's hard to believe hearing this all of a sudden. That's why I brought some evidence, I said, spreading documents like the business license transfer of rights agreement and lease agreement on the table, proving that I was the owner of the restaurant. My mother-in-law's face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents. Why didn't you say anything about this? You always talked about how you believed in Mark and how the restaurant was recovering, right? She demanded. Even before we got married, you always encouraged Mark like that. He felt pressured by your words but tried to live up to your expectations. Not wanting to disappoint you as the head of the household, you're pretty cold to people like me and Daniel who don't fulfill their roles, right? That's why Mark couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum of money from me. He could have just told me. That's why Mark couldn't speak his mind, because you get upset easily. People like my mother-in-law often don't realize they're putting pressure on others. They might think it's just a small thing to say, but for the one under pressure, it's a huge burden. Not something they can easily talk about. And even if they did speak up, you would likely be disappointed and start complaining. It was essential not to let Mark's spirit break under her constant jabs, especially when the restaurant was finally turning around. That's why I kept quiet too. But I really wish she had refused when Daniel and his family were coming back. Probably Mark thought it was work-related and agreed without thinking much, I admitted. Mom, Linda, I'm sorry. This situation is my fault for not being decisive enough. If I had managed the restaurant well from the start, Linda wouldn't have had to lend her money. And if I wasn't such a weakling, I could have told you the truth. If Linda decides to close the restaurant, then that's it. But what about the part-time workers? Mark said. Don't worry. In the past 2 weeks, I've already informed everyone about closing the restaurant, and they've all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time work at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts, I assured. That's a relief. So everyone was in on this, Linda showing me an empty restaurant as a surprise, and everyone keeping the closure for me. My mother-in-law asked. Mark, I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring you and Linda. I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave again. My mother-in-law apologized, and it seemed as if everything was resolving nicely. But that's a misunderstanding. I'm far from being satisfied, and the discussion is far from over. Let's settle this matter next, I said, pulling out divorce papers. What's this? A divorce paper? Mark picked up the papers in shock. Why a divorce? This is supposed to be a reconciliation, right? Don't just assume we've reconciled. You might think it's a secret, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it too. I said, displaying an image on my smartphone sent by a part-time worker showing Mark entering a hotel. Anyone can take such evidence, not just the police or detectives. Getting the second branch back on track gave you too much confidence. You really got carried away, I concluded. I remarked that as the owner of the restaurant, I couldn't just stand aside from the day-to-day operations. Even though I couldn't do much in terms of daily management, I made it a point to visit from time to time. During these visits, the part-time workers complained to me about Mark's affair and asked for my help. When I promised to handle it, they provided incredible support. They leaked information about Mark's affair, sent me proof, and even kept silent about the restaurant's closure from him. Wait a minute, closing the second branch and a divorce? What's going to happen to the rent for this place? My mother-in-law's voice shook. I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the entire rent of $10,000 a month for this house. Is that also true? Mark's shoulders slumped. It's true. When the restaurant's revenue started falling, Linda started paying half of it. But as revenue continued to drop, the amount she had to cover increased. Eventually, I ended up paying it all, $10,000 a month. It's the same as my salary, so I paid all the rent. And Mark covered other living expenses like food and utilities. So if Mark gets divorced and only has the main restaurant left, obviously living here won't be an option anymore, I stated matter-of-factly. Mark and my mother-in-law seemed deflated after hearing my words. They slumped as if they had exhausted themselves in a boxing match. Daniel and his wife, now somewhat understanding the situation, hesitantly joined the conversation. What does that mean? We came back here, can't live here? Sorry, Daniel. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house, Mark explained. Come on, do something. We're having a baby, at least give me a job. We have enough part-time, Daniel protested. The argument escalated, and it became clear that the future was uncertain for everyone involved. Witnessing the brothers dispute over their mother, the mother-child relationship also deteriorated. Now Mark and his mother are living together reluctantly in a smaller apartment, hardly talking and creating an awkward atmosphere. After the divorce, I first dealt with closing down the restaurant. It was a bit of a hassle, but as the owner, it was my responsibility. However, the fridge, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs I had removed were fairly new, so I managed to sell them at a good price. Adding just a little more money allowed me to finish the restaurant's closure, I recounted. Though it was a brief period, being a restaurant owner and handling its closure was an experience. I believe these experiences will be useful in my IT consulting work someday. I guess work suits me better than marriage. Convinced of this, I continue to work hard today. After the tumultuous events that unfolded, the conclusion of this saga brought a mix of resolution and uncertainty. I continued. The revelation of the true ownership of the restaurant, coupled with the exposure of Mark's affair, exposed the fractures in the family. The decision to close the second branch of the restaurant added a layer of financial stress and uncertainty about the future. Despite the apologies, it became clear that reconciling the strained relationships would be a complex and ongoing process, I added. The introduction of divorce papers, a decisive move by Linda, added another layer of complexity to this situation. The betrayal of trust both in the marriage and the business became a pivotal point that left the characters grappling with the aftermath. Linda's firm stance indicated that she was unwilling to overlook the breach of fidelity and was determined to take control of her life, even if it meant ending the marriage, I noted. As the fallout extended to Daniel and his family, the once close ties between the brothers strained, revealing the fragility of familial bonds under pressure. The uncertainty about living arrangements and financial stability left everyone involved facing an uncertain future. The emotional toll of the conflicts was palpable, as seen in the strained relationships and the awkward atmosphere that settled over the characters, I explained. In the end, the story leaves us with a sense of closure regarding the restaurant's closure and Linda's decision to end her marriage. However, it also leaves many questions unanswered about the characters' futures and whether they can rebuild their lives and relationships after the storm that shook the foundations of their family. The resolution, while bringing some clarity, marks the beginning of a new chapter for each character as they navigate the aftermath of the choices made and the consequences faced, I concluded.
Mom, hey Mom, wake up. I was suddenly shaken awake, my eyes barely open to see my daughter's anxious face looming in my blurry vision. Slowly, I sat up and asked her, "What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" "No, Mom, please. We need to run away from Dad now, hurry." With that single word, my groggy mind snapped to alertness. What followed was a shocking revelation from my daughter that left me dumbfounded. My name is Sarah. I'm a 35-year-old ordinary woman who works while raising my 7-year-old daughter, Emily. Our precious gem is not only adorable, but a bit unusual, or rather, has some mysterious aspects. Mom, you're forgetting your umbrella. Despite the weather forecast for the day being partly sunny with clouds, I was stopped by my daughter as I was about to leave the house. "It's fine. There's only a 10% chance of rain today. But Mom, you're going to get soaked. I saw it in a dream. Please take an umbrella with you." Reluctantly, I took the umbrella she handed me and headed to work. Lo and behold, I encountered a sudden downpour just before I was about to return home. I was surprised and came home drenched, only to be proudly greeted by my daughter, whose umbrella was also wet on the stand. "Welcome home, Mom. See, it happened just like I said. Emily has had this slight mysterious power since she was very young, accurately predicting the weather and dinner menus. It might be an exaggeration to call it a precognitive ability, but it's unusual. She sometimes feels out of place because of this, especially when playing with friends, but she doesn't seem to mind. Above all, we, her family, have accepted this as part of her uniqueness, and she's otherwise a perfectly normal, adorable girl. What concerns me more is my husband, Mike, who is the same age as me. We met through a marriage agency. Back then, I was a hard-working career woman, successful but inexperienced with relationships. Urged by my impatient parents, I registered with the agency. It might be odd for a wife to say, but Mike was even more handsome back then and instantly charmed me. Moreover, he was a feminist, and I instantly fell in love. Our relationship quickly progressed with marriage in mind. My husband and I have been married for 10 years this year. He always comes home late these days. Emily is only 7 years old, and she still requires a lot of care. Juggling her care, household chores, and work without Mike's help has been overwhelming. Everything costs money these days, and we need to save as much as we can for Emily's sake. You never know what might happen, so I'm working hard." That's what he said when I asked him about it. I can't argue with him when he says it's for Emily's sake. I've been overwhelmed with work, household chores, and solo parenting. Then one day, Mike came home early, looking extremely tense. Sensing the mood, I sent Emily away before asking, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "I want to quit my job," he said. It was completely unexpected. After putting Emily to bed, we talked. And it turned out he'd been struggling with workplace relationships and no longer found his job fulfilling, making it a pain to go to work. "Don't blame me, I just can't take it anymore. Once things settle down, I'll find another job right away. Until then, I'll take care of everything at home," he explained. I didn't want him to quit, but forcing him could lead to worse outcomes. Reluctantly, I agreed to his request. Before long, I got serious about my job, and my husband became a stay-at-home dad. His way of doing household chores and cooking was, to put it mildly, a bit sloppy compared to when I did them. What particularly bothered me was the meals. I came home around 9 o'clock at night when my daughter went to bed and ate my husband's homemade food. But there was a lot of fried food, and the seasoning was surprisingly strong, so I always needed water. The first time I ate it, I couldn't help but confront him. "What is this? You didn't feed the same thing to our daughter, did you?" No, I made sure to prepare something with lighter flavors for the kid, and I kept the portions appropriate. I thought you'd appreciate something with a bit more flavor after a long day. Too much fried food, not enough vegetables, and the soup barely tastes like anything. I'd be fine with lighter seasoning for kids, and I wish you'd paid more attention to balancing the meals, I complained. Despite my repeated comments, the seasoning and menu hardly changed. If I tried to leave anything uneaten, he'd say, "I'll save it for our daughter to eat tomorrow." That's a joke. I'd rather eat it myself than let our daughter have it. Reluctantly, I finished my meal, and as an apology, he started offering dessert after dinner. He also began preparing a nightly drink and snack, calling it a nightcap, thinking it would please me. I hadn't been much of a drinker or late-night snacker before, but I couldn't outright reject his kindness. I appreciated his efforts in cooking and his attempts at being a good house husband, so I generally turned a blind eye, enjoying the break from household chores. About 6 months into my role as the primary breadwinner, I finally had a day off with absolutely no plans. However, I felt off from the morning and lay down feeling foggy. Lately, I've been feeling lethargic, without any fever and suffering from headaches. I fall asleep right after eating. Maybe I've been overdoing it at work. Luckily, my husband took our daughter out to a nearby large shopping mall, promising to contact me if anything came up. Grateful for his thoughtfulness, allowing me some much-needed rest, I was dozing off. "I'm back." I woke up to the sound of the front door and my husband's voice. I realized it was already evening. I had slept through the day without having lunch since before noon. "Welcome back. Sorry, honey, I couldn't play with you today. Did you have fun?" I asked our daughter, holding a palm-sized character mascot she must have gotten while out. But she nodded quietly, looking down, unlike her usual self. I tilted my head, puzzled by her unusual behavior. "What's wrong? Did something happen? Maybe she's just tired from walking around all day. You should take a shower and rest early, okay?" My husband gently placed his hand on our daughter's shoulder, and she nodded slightly before heading to her room. When she was out of sight, I quietly asked my husband, "Hey, she seemed a bit off. Did you scold her or something?" "No, I didn't do anything. I think she's just tired. Anyway, about dinner." I tensed up at his words. I was frankly fed up with his cooking. "You know I'll cook tonight. I've had a restful day and feel energized." "Oh, okay. Then I'll prepare the nightcap. I even bought dessert as usual," he smiled, lifting a bag that clearly had the logo of a famous cream puff shop. "Let's make tonight's meal low-calorie and nutritious." Later, we had dinner together and decided to sleep together for the first time. Though she smiled when it was just the two of us, I could tell she was anxious and wanted to spend as much time together as possible. "Mom, I have something to say." In the privacy of our bedroom, wrapped in blankets, my daughter whispered in a voice so faint I almost missed it. What is it?" "Please don't drink any alcohol tonight," she said. What could this be? Another instance of her slight precognitive ability? Nodding in response to my daughter's serious gaze, she closed her eyes, seemingly reassured. So before my husband could prepare our nightcap, I went to bed and decided to sleep early. Surely he wouldn't go as far as to wake me up for a drink. If he tries to wake me, I'll just pretend to be asleep. With that thought in mind, I closed my eyes. "Mum, hey Mum, wake up." I was suddenly shaken awake, my eyes barely opened to see my daughter's anxious face looming in my blurry vision. I realized I had actually fallen asleep, my vision blurry as my daughter's anxious face came into view. Checking the bedside clock, I saw it was 2 a.m., and I noticed my husband, who should have been sleeping next to me, was absent. Maybe he went to the bathroom. Slowly sitting up, I asked her, "What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" "No, Mom, please. We need to run away from Dad now, hurry. That single word snapped me out of my grogginess. What did she just say? I asked her quietly, still in shock. Why? Why would you say that? This is our chance while Dad's not here. Because if we don't, something bad's going to happen to you, Mom, like getting sick or an accident, she explained urgently. What do you mean? I stared dumbfounded. My daughter, unable to hold back any longer, started to cry. Holding her in my lap and gently stroking her trembling back, she gradually calmed down and began to speak. According to her, while returning from the restroom at the mall, she overheard her dad on the phone. Having always been told not to interrupt when someone is on the phone, she approached quietly. Dad was saying, just a little longer, and she'll be gone, planning to make it look like an accident or illness. Once that's done, we can be together with the insurance money. Who was he talking to? I asked, shaken. I don't know. At first, I thought it was you, Mom, but it wasn't because Dad. He was saying bad things about you, and he said, I love you to the person. My daughter was sobbing. If this was true, my husband was planning to send me to my demise. Besides, my husband is having an affair, my daughter continued. He said, I love you to someone, not Mom, she added. I was so shocked. I accidentally called out to Dad. Then Dad immediately ended the call and asked, How long have you been there? When I said, Just now, he smiled and said, Let's keep this our little secret from Mom. If you don't tell, you'll get a new kind and sweet mom. Tears and snot streamed down her face as she clung to me. But I want you. I don't need another mom. I love you so much, she wailed, clinging to me. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for putting her through this and anger towards my husband. My daughter had braved her fears to protect me from her own father. How scared she must have been, how much courage she must have needed. Afterwards, holding my daughter, we went downstairs to the entrance. The moment I noticed my husband's favorite shoes were missing, any slight trust I had in him vanished alongside my daughter's words. According to her, this wasn't the first time he had left in the middle of the night. She had seen him leave several times when going to the bathroom. How had I never noticed before, even in deep sleep? If my daughter rarely wakes up at night and had seen him leave multiple times, it must have been frequent. My daughter was gripping the hem of my dress tightly. Her actions made me realize there was no time to doubt my husband. That's right. This is not the time for that. I need to respond to my daughter's courage, I thought. Perhaps because I hadn't drunk any alcohol. I felt more alert and clear-headed than usual. Looking into my daughter's eyes, I said, Emily, if we run away from Dad now, we might never see him again. Will you still come with me? Yes, I'm scared of Dad. I want to be with you, Mom, she replied, her voice filled with determination. I want to stay with you forever, she said. All right, I made up my mind. Fortunately, my daughter was in the middle of her summer vacation. I told her to pack what she needed, and I quickly packed our bags as well. Then I was stunned as I checked the contents of the drawer where I kept our valuables. Opening another drawer that I rarely opened, my suspicion was confirmed. A surge of anger rose within me, but for now, leaving was the priority. We hurriedly left the house before dawn and decided to seek refuge at my parents' house. My parents were surprised to see us arrive so early in the morning, but they kindly welcomed us. After showing them what I found just before leaving and explaining what my daughter had told me, after the day had fully dawned, I sent a casual message. Mom got hurt. I'm taking my daughter to help out for about a month or so. Please take care of the house while we're gone. Got it? Leave everything here to me. He was surprisingly calm about his daughter and wife disappearing overnight. Clearly, he must be smirking, thinking he can now do as he pleases alone. I'll lay low for now, but I won't let this go for my daughter's sake. As soon as we arrived at my parents' house, my daughter, still with tear stains on her cheeks, fell asleep. Looking at her sleeping face, I made a certain phone call. About a month after taking refuge at my parents' house, I decided to return home, leaving my daughter with my mom. Entering the living room after unlocking the door, my smartphone in my chest pocket, my husband, who had been holding his head in front of his smartphone, gave me a forced smile, as if nothing had happened. "Oh, welcome back. Don't just come back suddenly like that. You surprised me. How about I make you a nice iced coffee with lots of milk and sugar?" If it were the old me, I might have been deceived. Not today. I don't need it. Instead, I want you to write this. I confronted my husband, who was about to head to the kitchen with divorce papers. He sighed deeply after glancing at them. "Divorce, huh? Well, if that's what you really want, I'll agree." His reaction was expected, but it infuriated me. He casually accepted it with a smile. "I'll agree to the divorce since you're the one asking for it. But you'll meet my demands for the settlement, right?" "What are you talking about? You're the one who'll be paying." My husband looked puzzled. He shook his head unwillingly, with a forced smile. "Come on, I've been supporting you in my way, and now you're handing me divorce papers unilaterally? A good husband, the kind that skips work for affairs and plans to put his wife in danger." "What are you talking about?" I couldn't help but snort at his dumbfounded face. I pulled out a small bottle filled with pills from a drawer I hardly use and showed it to him. The label read, "For stubborn insomnia, 1 pill for a good night's sleep." That's it. I bought it because I couldn't sleep well. It's obvious if you look at it. The amount hasn't decreased since I left. I'd opened and took pictures of everything before I left. Want me to compare? Don't talk nonsense. Besides, where's the proof that I gave those to you? "Everything you've been doing with your mistress. I know all about it," I said, returning to my seat with the bottle in hand. Pulling an envelope from my bag and spilling its contents, my husband froze in shock. No wonder those were printouts of messages he had sent to his mistress. It says things like, "I'm skipping work to see you. Wait for me. I quit my job so we can talk more. Love you. I've got something that'll make sure she won't wake up. I can visit you during that. Think we can be together soon. Wait for me, my princess." He sent this kind of message. Every lie about working late and his plans to make my demise look like an accident or illness were detailed. Thinking back, the meals he prepared for me were high in salt, fat, and even sugary desserts. It's no wonder my health declined. Plus, he probably tampered with my drinks while I took a shower. I didn't drink often, so I didn't notice. But when I drank the same thing at my parents' house, the difference in taste was shocking and confirmed my suspicions. I started feeling unusually tired after beginning to eat your meals. I never felt refreshed despite falling asleep quickly. No wonder, with alcohol and these pills mixing, them is the worst. Imagine what could have happened, I said, watching as my husband's face turned pale and his eyes darted around. "That's how come you have this stuff. Don't tell me you snooped through my phone." "That's a violation of privacy," he accused. "No, I got it from her, your mistress," I said, flipping over a second envelope to show him. His face went white. No wonder. The scattered photos showed him getting cozy with a young woman right after returning to my parents' house,